For 15 days, the millionaire's son refused any food, lost in silence and apathy. The housemaid's poor daughter sensed that something in the kitchen was more bitter than it seemed. She uncovered the truth hidden in the spoons, and with bread, affection and courage brought hunger back to life. Chapter 1. The Silence of Raphael. High up in Beverly Hills, an affluent neighborhood in Los Angeles, a 3-story mansion with mirrored glass reflected the afternoon sun. To anyone passing by on the tree-lined street, it was just another luxury residence among many. But within those impeccably white walls, a silent drama was unfolding, invisible to the eyes of those who merely admired the imposing architecture designed by the renowned architect Oscar Albright. Raphael Covington Miller, at just 3 years old, was the sole heir to the Miller & Sons cosmetics empire. For 15 days, the boy had not accepted any food. He remained motionless in his imported mahogany crib, his lost gaze fixed on the ceiling of his astronaut-themed bedroom. His eyes, once as lively and curious as any healthy child's, now seemed like empty windows, devoid of sparkle or expression. Little Raphael's room had been transformed into an extension of a doctor's office. Expensive formulas, imported from Switzerland and Germany, occupied the dresser next to the crib. Special nutritional supplements, some not yet approved for use in the United States, were methodically lined up. Medical reports piled up on the authentic Eames armchair, where the nanny used to tell stories. In an adjacent room, Edward Covington Miller, 42, CEO of Miller & Sons, held another medical report in his trembling hands. His red eyes betrayed sleepless nights, and his unshaven beard contrasted with the always impeccable look he maintained at board meetings. Since the accident that had taken his wife Caroline 6 months ago, Edward had seemed like a ghost wandering the halls of this house that no longer felt like home. Childhood traumatic grief and the need to establish new emotional bonds, read the report in his hands, signed by Dr. Richard Foster, the most prestigious pediatric neurologist in Los Angeles. Edward ran his hands through his prematurely graying hair and took a deep breath. How could he help his son when he could barely function himself? Downstairs, Marcia Fontaine, 38, Edward's new wife, was speaking in low tones with the newly hired nurse. Tall, elegant, with brown hair always impeccably styled, Marcia had entered Edward's life 3 months after Caroline's passing, initially as an executive assistant. The quick marriage surprised everyone, especially the Miller family, who questioned the speed of the union. But Edward, desperate for some safe harbor, did not listen to the warnings. "We need to follow the protocol to the letter," Marcia instructed, handing the nurse a detailed spreadsheet. "These are the formulas to be administered every 3 hours. If he refuses, make a note and try again in an hour." Edward can't know about every refusal. He's already fragile enough. The nurse, new and intimidated by Marcia's firm demeanor, just nodded, tucking the spreadsheet into her pocket. "One last thing," Marcia added. "I am proposing hospitalization for Raphael. I've already spoken with specialists who confirmed it's the best course of action. Edward is still resisting, but he'll soon understand it's necessary." In the service area, far from the watchful eyes of the new lady of the house, Celia was vigorously scrubbing the marble floor. At 49, she had worked for the Miller family since before Raphael was born. Her calloused hands told stories of a life of hard work in the working-class neighborhood of East Los Angeles, where she was raising her 10-year-old daughter, Manuela, on her own. Celia observed the changes in the house with attentive eyes and a heavy heart. Since Marcia's arrival, a heavy atmosphere had settled in. Raphael's laughter, already rare after his mother's departure, had ceased completely. Meals, once moments of affection even in Caroline's absence, were now tense, timed rituals full of demands. "Mom, can I come with you today?" Manuela's voice came through the phone. It was break time at her public school. "Not today." "Sweetie, Mrs. Beatrice can't stay with you this afternoon," Celia replied, referring to the neighbor who looked after the girl when she had to work. "But I finished my homework early, and Ms. Louise said I can leave after lunch." "Please, Mom, I promise I'll be quiet." Celia hesitated. It wasn't house policy to bring children, but since Mrs. Caroline had passed, many rules had changed. Besides, the new boss would be busy with her book club meeting, which seemed more like a parade of jewelry and gossip. "All right, come. But you must stay in the service area, no noise, understand?" "Yes, thanks, Mom." The joy in Manuela's voice was palpable. 4 hours later, Manuela arrived at the mansion. Small for her age, with curly hair tied in 2 braids and observant dark eyes, the girl knew the protocols of invisibility well. As a cleaner's daughter, she had learned early on how to move through others' spaces without being noticed. Edward crossed paths with her in the hallway, and for a moment their eyes met. He managed a sad smile, the first in weeks, and continued toward his office. Manuela responded with a shy curtsy and continued on her way to the service area, where her mother was finishing organizing the cleaning supplies. "Mom, can I help with anything?" she asked softly. Celia smiled, stroking her daughter's hair. "Just sit over there and do your homework. When I'm done here, we'll go home." Manuela nodded, but her attention was soon captured by voices coming from the kitchen. It was the new lady Marcia giving instructions to the cook. "These purees need to be prepared exactly as the recipe states. No improvising, no seasoning to taste." The pediatrician was specific. Curiosity led Manuela to approach discreetly. Through the crack in the door, she saw Marcia separating colorful jars and labeling bottles with almost clinical precision. There was something strange about the scene, something she couldn't quite define. On the second floor, little Raphael remained in his state of absence. The doctors had ruled out physical causes for his refusal to eat. The tests showed no illness that would justify the behavior. The official explanation, accepted by all, was emotional trauma. That night, while her mother finished her last chores, Manuela asked for permission to use the bathroom. On her way back, disobeying the rules, she took a detour. Something compelled her to meet the boy who had lost his joy. Silently, she entered Raphael's room. The dimness was broken only by a small rocket-shaped nightlight. The boy was awake, eyes open and fixed on the ceiling. "Hi," Manuela whispered. "My name is Manuela." Raphael didn't respond, nor did he shift his gaze. "My mom works here. She cleans your house," she continued in a confidential tone. "They say you don't want to eat. Are you sick?" No answer. Manuela moved closer and noticed on the nightstand a half-empty bottle. On impulse, she picked it up and sniffed the contents. She immediately wrinkled her nose. "This smells weird," she commented, more to herself than to Raphael. "It smells like that bitter medicine I took when I had a sore throat." For the first time, the boy's eyes moved in her direction. It was just for an instant, but it was enough for Manuela to realize there was something there. It wasn't just sadness, there was fear. "Manu, where are you?" Celia's worried voice echoed down the hall. "I have to go," Manuela whispered quickly. "But I'll be back, I promise." Before leaving, she placed a small package wrapped in a napkin on Raphael's bed. "It's bread and butter. My mom makes it for me every day. It's good." That night, as they rode the bus home, Manuela remained unusually silent. Her mind was buzzing with thoughts and observations. There was something wrong in that big house, something the adults weren't seeing. "Mom," she said finally, "that boy, your boss's son. He seems sad." Celia sighed, squeezing her daughter's hand. "It's normal, sweetie. He lost his mum. Mrs. Caroline was a very good person." "But it's not just sadness, Mom," Manuela insisted. "There's something strange." "What kind of strange?" Celia frowned, worried by her daughter's tone. Manuela hesitated, unsure if she should share her nascent suspicions. After all, she was just a child. Who would believe her? "Nothing," she finally replied. "I just thought he looked very skinny." As the bus made its way to the outskirts of the city, Manuela made a silent decision. She was going to find out what was happening to Raphael Covington Miller, and somehow she was going to help him. Chapter 2, Eyes That See. The next morning, Manuela woke up before her alarm clock. Sitting on the edge of her simple bed in the small 2-room house she shared with her mother, the girl looked at a worn-out notebook that Miss Louise had given her at the end of the previous school year. Until now, it had remained practically untouched. Manuela had never had much to record. But now she felt she needed to write down her observations, just as she had learned in science class. "What are you doing up so early, sweetie?" Celia asked, still sleepy upon seeing the girl so focused. "I'm working on a school project." "Mom," Manuela lied, quickly hiding the notebook under her pillow. At breakfast, while eating her bread and butter, the same kind she had left for Raphael the night before, Manuela formulated her plan. "Mom, can I go to work with you again today? The teacher said we're having a parent-teacher conference next week, so we won't have classes." Celia hesitated, but eventually agreed. The week had been difficult at the Miller mansion, and Manuela's presence brought a bit of joy to her exhausting days. You can come, but remember the rules. Stay in the service area and don't bother anyone. On the crowded bus that crossed the city from end to end, connecting the working-class neighborhood to the affluent one, Manuela held the notebook tight against her chest. She had decided she would be a detective, like in the books she loved to read at the school library. And her first case would be to find out why the millionaire's son wouldn't eat. At the mansion, Edward was leaving for an important meeting with foreign investors. He kissed his son's forehead, who remained apathetic, and left instructions for Marcia. Dr. Foster is coming at 3. Please keep everything organized for him. Try to get Raphael to eat something today. Marcia nodded with an air of studied concern. I'll do my best, dear. But maybe it's time to consider the hospitalization that Dr. Oliveira suggested. Edward frowned. Not yet. I want to try a few more days at home. When Edward left, Marcia called the nurse, Luciana, for a private meeting in the office. Manuela, who had managed to slip into the house discreetly by pretending to help her mother carry cleaning supplies, watched everything from a distance, hidden behind a column in the hallway. The instructions remain the same, Marcia said in a low but firm tone. Administer the formulas I've set aside at the exact times. No improvising. And remember, any improvement you report to me first before telling Mr. Edward. The nurse, a woman of about 30 with a nervous expression, just nodded. There was something in her eyes that intrigued Manuela, a mix of fear and distrust. When the two women left the office, Manuela took the opportunity to explore the mansion. She knew the service routes, the secondary staircases, and the less frequented corridors well. Her small stature and light steps made her almost invisible to the adults who were too busy with their own problems. She arrived at the main kitchen just as the cook, Irene, was preparing the day's meals. A middle-aged woman with experienced hands and a kind gaze, Irene had been working for the Millers for almost as long as Celia. This boy needs to eat something simple, something that reminds him of the food his mother used to make, Irene muttered to herself as she prepared a soup. Marcia entered the kitchen suddenly, startling both Irene and Manuela, who quickly hid behind a half-open door. What are you doing, Irene? Marcia asked, eyeing the pot on the stove. A vegetable soup, ma'am. Just like Mrs. Caroline used to make for the boy when he was feeling unwell. No. Marcia shook her head firmly. We've already discussed this. No old recipes. Raphael needs to follow the new dietary regimen prescribed by the specialists. Irene lowered her eyes, but her discontent was visible. With all due respect, ma'am, the boy hasn't accepted these commercial purees for 2 weeks. Maybe something familiar. I understand your concern, Marcia interrupted in a falsely understanding tone, but we need to follow medical advice. Discard this soup and prepare the purees according to the recipes I left. That's an order. When Marcia left, Irene let out a deep sigh and continued stirring the soup without discarding it. Manuela took the opportunity to come out of her hiding place. Hi, Irene, she said softly. The cook turned, surprised, but soon broke into a smile upon recognizing Celia's daughter. Manuela. What are you doing here, girl? Does your mother know you're wandering around the house? Sort of, Manuela replied with a shy smile. Can I try your soup? It smells so good. Irene glanced around, making sure they were alone, and filled a small bowl. Here, but eat it quickly. If Mrs. Marcia comes back. Manuela savored the hot soup with genuine pleasure. It was simple but delicious. Small pieces of potato, carrot, zucchini, and shredded chicken in an aromatic broth. Why doesn't she want you to make this soup for Raphael? She asked between spoonfuls. Irene shrugged, an expression of helplessness on her time-worn face. She says the boy needs special foods with nutrients that this simple food doesn't have. But in my opinion, she lowered her tone to a whisper, she just wants to complicate things to seem indispensable. Manuela reflected on those words as she finished the soup. She thanked Irene and left the kitchen discreetly, going up the back stairs to the second floor. In the hallway leading to Raphael's room, she found the nurse, Luciana, coming out with an untouched tray. The woman's face was worried. Anything new? Asked Marcia, who was waiting in the hallway. Nothing. He didn't even look at the food, Luciana replied, visibly discouraged. This can't go on, Marcia sighed, taking the tray. I'll prepare the next bottle myself. Maybe if we change the consistency. Manuela waited for the two to move away, and making sure no one was around, silently entered Raphael's room. The boy was just as he was last time, motionless with an empty gaze, but this time Manuela noticed that the small bread package she had left the night before was gone. "Did you eat the bread?" she asked in a low voice, approaching the crib. Raphael didn't answer, but his eyes moved slightly toward the door, as if checking if they were truly alone. It was such a subtle gesture that any hurried adult would have missed it, but it didn't escape Manuela's keen observation. "I brought more," she whispered, pulling a folded napkin from her pocket, containing a small piece of bread with jam. "My mom made it this morning. It's strawberry." She placed the package within the boy's reach and, to her surprise, saw Raphael's little fingers move slightly toward the food. It was the first voluntary movement she had witnessed. "I knew it!" she exclaimed in an excited whisper. "You can move. You just don't want their food, right?" Raphael didn't respond verbally, but his eyes met Manuela's for a brief moment before returning to their fixation on the ceiling. That look, however, was enough to confirm the girl's suspicions. Hearing footsteps in the hallway, Manuela quickly hid inside the wardrobe, leaving the door ajar to watch. It was Marcia, carrying a bottle with a thick, yellowish liquid. "Time for your special formula. Sweetie," she said with false sweetness, approaching the crib. She sat on the edge of the bed and tried to make Raphael drink, but the boy turned his face away, closing his lips firmly. "You need to eat." "Raphael," Marcia's voice now had a tone of irritation, "your father is very worried. If you keep this up, we'll have to hospitalize you. Is that what you want?" Getting no response, Marcia let out an exasperated sigh and placed the bottle on the nightstand. "I'll leave it here, in case you change your mind. The nurse will be back in an hour." When Marcia left, Manuela waited a few minutes before coming out of her hiding place. She approached the nightstand and picked up the bottle, sniffing its contents. Immediately, she smelled the same bitter odor she had noticed the night before. "There's something wrong with this," she murmured to herself. "This smell isn't normal." Looking around, she found a piece of paper on the desk near the window. She poured a few drops of the liquid from the bottle onto the paper and put it in her pocket. Then she approached the crib again. "Raphael, I know you're listening to me. There's something wrong with this food. I'm going to find out what it is, I promise." Back in the service area, Manuela found her mother cleaning the downstairs bathrooms. "Where were you, Manu? I looked all over for you." "I was exploring a little, Mom. It's just... I got curious about the sick boy." Celia frowned. "You know you shouldn't be wandering around the house. If Mrs. Marcia finds out—" "Mom," Manuela interrupted with a seriousness unusual for her age, "I think there's something strange going on." "What do you mean?" Manuela hesitated, organizing her thoughts. "Raphael, I don't think he's sick. He just doesn't want to eat what they give him." Celia sighed, returning to her task. "Manuela, the doctors have already examined the boy. Of course he's sick. He's grieving for his mother. But, Mom, what if there's more to it? I gave him a piece of bread yesterday and today it was gone. Someone ate it and I bet it was him." "Manu, stop it," Celia warned. "I don't want you making up stories about the employers. We could lose our jobs." Manuela lowered her head, but her determination only grew. That afternoon, while her mother finished her last chores, the girl used her notebook to make detailed notes. Mealtimes. Who prepared each bottle? Raphael's reactions. The behavior of Marcia and the nurse. On the way home, she mentally reviewed everything she had observed. She needed more proof, more information. And above all, she needed to get Raphael to eat something that didn't come from Marcia's hands. Later, in the small kitchen of her house, while Celia prepared a simple rice dish for dinner, Manuela pulled out the paper where she had placed drops of the liquid from the bottle. To her surprise, the paper had darkened, forming a brownish stain. "What's that, Manu?" Celia asked, noticing the paper in her daughter's hand. "A school experiment," she replied quickly, putting the paper away. "We're studying chemical reactions." That night, lying in her bed, Manuela planned her next steps. Tomorrow would be Saturday, the day her mother did a general cleaning at the Miller mansion. It would be her opportunity to gather more evidence and perhaps help Raphael to eat properly. "I'm going to find out what you're doing, Mrs. Marcia," she whispered into the dark. "And I'm going to help Raphael start eating again. Chapter 3, Proof and Crumbs. Saturday dawned with a fine, typical Los Angeles drizzle. Manuela woke up anxious, mentally reviewing her plan as she helped her mother prepare breakfast. On the small, worn formica table, she set out items she considered essential for her investigation: the notebook, a few small plastic bags she had saved from the bakery, and 3 pieces of homemade bread that their neighbor, Mrs. Maria, had brought over the previous afternoon. "Why are you taking so much bread?" Celia asked, watching her daughter carefully wrap the pieces in napkins. "I'm just really hungry today," Manuela replied, avoiding her mother's gaze. She hated lying, but she felt her mission was too important to be interrupted. At the Miller mansion, the weekend brought a different dynamic. Edward, free from his executive duties, spent more time at home, though rarely in the same room as his son. Guilt consumed him like a silent cancer, making him avoid the room where Raphael remained in his near-catatonic state. The doctor called, Marcia informed him during breakfast. Served on the veranda overlooking the impeccable garden. "He thinks we should seriously consider hospitalization. It's been 15 days without proper nutrition, Edward. His condition could worsen quickly." Edward set his coffee cup down on the glass table, the liquid trembling slightly, mirroring his internal state. "We'll give it until Monday," he decided, his voice choked. "If there's no improvement, I'll agree to the hospitalization." Marcia nodded, feigning concern, but Manuela, who was helping her mother clean the adjacent room, noticed a glint of satisfaction in the woman's eyes. While Celia was busy cleaning the guest rooms, Manuela managed to sneak into the kitchen, where she found Irene preparing lunch. The smell of sautéed garlic and onion filled the air. "Good morning, Irene," Manuela greeted, approaching cautiously. "Hello, little one," the cook smiled. "Come to taste my food again." Manuela returned the smile, but her expression quickly turned serious. "Actually, I wanted to ask you something. Have you noticed anything strange about the things Mrs. Marcia prepares for Raphael?" Irene stopped what she was doing, glancing quickly at the kitchen door to make sure they were alone. "Why do you ask, child?" "It's just—" Manuela hesitated, choosing her words. "Yesterday I saw a bottle she prepared. It had a weird, bitter smell." The cook frowned, drying her hands on her apron. "You know, Manuela, I find it strange too. Since she arrived, she's taken complete control of the boy's food. No one else can prepare anything for him without her supervision. And coincidence or not, that's when he stopped eating completely. Do you think she could be doing something on purpose?" Irene glanced at the door again, even more nervous. "I can't accuse anyone without proof, child. And you shouldn't either. But," she lowered her voice even more, "a few days ago I found a strange vial in her drawer. It had no pharmacy label, no leaflet. When I asked what it was, she said it was a special supplement imported from Switzerland." Manuela absorbed the information, a chill running down her spine. Her suspicions were taking on a more definite shape. "Irene, can I ask you a favor? Can you make a simple snack that I can take to Raphael? Something his mother used to give him?" The cook hesitated for a moment, but eventually agreed. "I'll make some oatmeal with banana. It's what Mrs. Caroline used to prepare when he was feeling unwell." "But how will you manage to give it to him?" "The nurse is always in the room." "Leave it to me," Manuela replied with determination. "I just need to wait for the right moment." While she waited, Manuela decided to explore the mansion further, looking for additional clues. Upstairs, she heard voices coming from Edward's office. The door was ajar, and she could see Marcia speaking on the phone in a low tone. "Yes, doctor. The situation remains the same. He resists any food. No, the tests don't show anything conclusive. Yes, Edward is already considering hospitalization." There was something in Marcia's voice that sounded false, as if she were playing a role. Manuela continued to watch, and when Marcia hung up, she saw her open a desk drawer and take out a small unlabeled amber vial. With precise movements, she transferred a few drops of the liquid into a bottle already prepared on the desk. "This will ensure we stay on the right path," Marcia muttered to herself, putting the vial back in the drawer. Manuela backed away silently, her heart racing. She needed to see the contents of that vial. Hours later, when Marcia left for lunch with friends, Manuela seized the opportunity. With light steps, she entered the office and went straight to the drawer she had seen Marcia open. It was locked. Frustrated but not defeated, she looked around for the key. Nothing. Then She remembered a trick she had learned from an older boy at school, using a bobby pin to unlock simple drawers. With the bobby pin she always used to hold back her bangs, Manuela worked on the lock for a few minutes until she heard a satisfying click. The drawer opened, revealing organized documents, a planner, and at the back, hidden under papers, the amber vial. Carefully, she took out the vial and sniffed it. The same bitter odor she had smelled in Raphael's bottle. There was no label, just a small handwritten tag with what looked like a code, XTER Q971. Using one of the plastic bags she had brought, Manuela collected a few drops of the liquid. Then, very carefully, she placed the vial back exactly where she had found it and closed the drawer. Leaving the office, she ran into her mother in the hallway. "Manuela, what are you doing here?" Celia asked, surprised and worried. I was looking for the bathroom," she lied, hiding the plastic bag in her pocket. Celia narrowed her eyes, suspicious. "You know perfectly well where the bathroom is, and you shouldn't be wandering around the house alone." "Sorry, Mom, I won't do it again." But Manuela knew she would have to break that promise. Her investigation was just beginning. In the kitchen, Irene discreetly handed her a small thermal container with the oatmeal and banana. "It's warm, just how he liked it," the cook explained. "But how will you manage to give it to him without anyone seeing?" "The nurse leaves for lunch at noon," Manuela replied. "And Mrs. Marcia won't be back before 3, according to what I heard. I have a window of opportunity." Irene smiled, impressed by the little girl's vocabulary and determination. "You're a very special girl, you know. But be careful. I don't want you or your mother getting into trouble." Punctually at noon, the nurse Luciana left Raphael's room for her lunch break. She had left a prepared bottle on the nightstand, the same one Manuela had seen Marcia tamper with hours earlier. Making sure no one was in the hallway, Manuela entered the room, carrying the container of oatmeal and the wrapped pieces of bread. Raphael remained motionless in the crib, but his eyes moved immediately in her direction when the door opened. "Hi, Raphael," Manuela whispered, approaching. "I brought you something to eat. Something good, with nothing bad in it." Manuela took the bottle from the nightstand and poured its contents into another plastic bag, sealing it carefully. Then she sat on the edge of the crib and opened the thermal container, revealing the creamy aromatic oatmeal. "Irene said your mum used to make this for you when you were feeling sick," she explained, stirring the oatmeal with a small spoon. "Want to try?" To her surprise and joy, Raphael moved slightly, lifting his head a few inches. His eyes, previously empty, now showed interest. "See? I knew you could move," Manuela exclaimed in a low voice, offering a spoonful of oatmeal. Hesitantly, Raphael opened his mouth and accepted the food. For a moment there was no reaction. Then something extraordinary happened. He swallowed and slowly opened his mouth again, asking for more. "That's it." "Very good," Manuela encouraged, offering another spoonful. Little by little, Raphael accepted the oatmeal, spoonful after spoonful, until he had consumed almost half the container. His movements became increasingly decisive, as if a fog were lifting from his body. "Now I'll leave this little piece of bread here for you," Manuela said, hiding the package under his pillow. "It's for later when you're hungry again." Raphael watched her with now attentive eyes, a spark of life returning to his face. He didn't speak, but his lips curved into what could be interpreted as the beginning of a smile. "You're not sick, are you?" Manuela asked, though she knew she wouldn't get a verbal answer. "It's the food they give you. There's something bad in it. But don't worry, I'll find out what it is and tell your dad." Hearing footsteps in the hallway, Manuela quickly closed the thermal container and hid it along with the plastic bags in her small backpack. She whispered a quick, "See you tomorrow," and slipped out through the ajar door of the adjacent bathroom, seconds before Nurse Luciana returned. Back in the service area, Manuela organized her findings in her notebook. 1. Marcia adds something. From an amber vial to Raphael's bottles. 2. Risa, the substance has a bitter smell and leaves dark stains on paper. Raphael accepts normal food when it doesn't have the strange substance. Marcia wants Raphael to be hospitalized. It was the beginning of a dossier that, though rudimentary, was starting to document a disturbing pattern. "What are you writing so intently?" Celia asked, approaching from behind her daughter. Manuela quickly closed the notebook. "Just a diary, Mom, school stuff." Celia sat down next to her daughter, her expression serious. "Manuela, you're hiding something from me." You've been acting strange since yesterday, secretive. What's going on? Thirskid face. Ephesius Tamarfi, the girl, hesitated, pondering whether she should share her suspicions with her mother. On one hand, she needed help. On the other, she feared putting Celia's job at risk. Mum, if you saw someone doing something wrong, something very wrong, what would you do? It depends on what, sweetie. Some things you have to report, others it's better not to get involved in. And if it was something that was hurting a child, Celia's expression changed immediately, a shadow of concern crossing her face. That's serious, Manu. If a child is in danger, we have to help. Always. She paused, studying her daughter. What did you see, Manuela? Does it have to do with the boy, Raphael? Slowly, Manuela nodded, opening her notebook. I think Mrs. Marcia is putting something bad in his food. Mom, something that makes him not want to eat. Celia paled, looking around to make sure they were alone. That's a very serious accusation, sweetie. Are you sure? In response, Manuela took the plastic bag with the drops of the mysterious liquid and the sample from the bottle out of her pocket. She puts this in his food. Smell it, Mom. It has a horrible, bitter smell. And look, she showed the stained paper. It leaves this dark mark. It's not normal. Celia examined the evidence, her face growing more and more worried. My God, Manuela, if this is true. It is true, Mom. Today I gave him oatmeal without this strange stuff and he ate it. He's not sick. He's being poisoned. As she uttered the word poisoned, the gravity of the situation fell like a weight on both of them. Celia hugged her daughter tightly, as if to protect her from the evil they had discovered. We need to think carefully about the next step. Manu, this is dangerous. While mother and daughter discussed in low voices what to do with this disturbing information, in the main kitchen, Marcia was examining the thermal container that Manuela had inadvertently dropped from her backpack. Whose is this? She asked Irene, showing the container with leftover oatmeal. Oh, it must be Celia's daughter's, the cook replied, trying to sound casual. The girl usually brings her snack from home. Marcia observed the contents carefully, dipping a finger in and tasting it. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. Oatmeal with banana? An interesting choice for a child to bring from home, she commented, placing the container on the counter, especially considering it's exactly what Caroline used to prepare for Raphael. Irene felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something predatory in Marcia's gaze. A coincidence, I suppose, the cook murmured, turning back to the stove to avoid the inquisitive look. Perhaps, Marcia replied dryly. Or perhaps we have a little meddler on our hands. Chapter 4. Trail of Suspicion. Sunday arrived with a deep blue sky, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside Manuela and Celia's small home. After the previous day's discovery, mother and daughter had spent the night discussing what to do with the evidence they had collected. We can't just accuse Mrs. Marcia without concrete proof, Celia argued, preparing breakfast. She's the boss's wife and we're employees. No one will believe our word against hers. Manuela stirred her oatmeal, thoughtful. The same questions haunted her young mind, which was endowed with a maturity beyond her years. We need more proof, she finally concluded, something that leaves no doubt. And how do you plan to get that, Manu? The girl looked at the notebook where she had recorded all her observations. I'm going to document everything. The mealtimes, who prepares them, how Raphael reacts. If we establish a pattern, maybe we can convince Mr. Edward. Celia let out a tired sigh. She admired her daughter's determination, but feared the consequences. You know it's not a work day, right? We have no excuse to go to the mansion today. I know, Manuela replied, a plan already forming in her head. But remember, Irene mentioned she was making a cake for her granddaughter's birthday today. We could stop by to help. Celia's expression was a mixture of worry and resignation. She knew her daughter well enough to know she would find a way to continue her investigation, with or without help. All right, she finally agreed. But we'll be discreet, and at the first sign of trouble, we're leaving immediately. At the Miller mansion, Sunday brought an artificial quiet. Edward had spent the morning locked in his office, signing documents and trying not to think about the ultimatum he himself had set. If Raphael didn't start eating by Monday, he would agree to the hospitalization. Marcia, for her part, kept busy with preparations for the week. In the kitchen, She separated ingredients for the special formulas she claimed were essential for Raphael's recovery, while issuing orders to the reduced Sunday staff. When the intercom buzzed announcing Celia and Manuela's arrival, Marcia frowned. "What are they doing here today?" she asked the housekeeper who answered the call. "Celia said she came to help Irene with the birthday cake," the woman replied, avoiding her employer's gaze. Very convenient," Marcia muttered, watching the two arrive from the window. Her eyes lingered on the small figure of Manuela, who was carrying her inseparable backpack. "Tell them to use the service entrance and stay restricted to the kitchen." In the service area, Irene welcomed Celia and Manuela with a warm smile, though her eyes revealed concern. "I'm so glad you came," she said softly, hugging Celia. "We need to talk." While mixing the batter for the chocolate cake she was preparing for her granddaughter, Irene recounted the incident from the previous day. Marcia found the oatmeal container and asked questions. "I think she suspects something." Celia cast a worried glance at Manuela, who pretended to be absorbed in decorating smaller cupcakes, but was listening intently to every word. "What did she say exactly?" "She commented that she found it interesting for a child to bring oatmeal with banana, especially since it was the recipe Caroline used to make for Raphael." Irene lowered her voice even more. "And later I saw her talking to Edward. I couldn't hear everything, but she mentioned concern about people who might be interfering with the treatment." Celia paled. "My God, she's setting us up." "Not only that," Irene continued, looking nervously at the door, "this morning I found the pantry cupboard locked. All the food that will be given to Raphael is now under lock and key. And only Marcia and the nurse have access." Manuela interrupted her task, approaching the women. "That just proves we're right," she whispered with intensity. "She's hiding something, or protecting herself from accusations," Celia pondered. "Either way, it has complicated our investigation." Irene wiped her hands on her apron, a decision made in her expression. "I'm with you," she declared. "I've worked for this family for over 15 years. I saw Raphael being born. I saw the love Caroline had for him. If someone is harming that boy, I can't stand by and do nothing." The three exchanged determined glances. A silent alliance had been formed. "What do we do now?" Celia asked. Manuela, always practical, already had a plan. "We need to continue monitoring the feeding routine. Irene, you can write down the times Marcia prepares the bottles and who takes them to Raphael. Mom, you can check his room's trash, see if there are any empty packages of unprescribed medications. And she hesitated, knowing her idea was the riskiest. "I need to get a larger sample of that strange liquid." "Absolutely not," Celia protested. "That's too dangerous, Manu." "But Mom, without that proof, no one will believe us." Their discussion was interrupted by Edward's sudden entrance into the kitchen. He looked worn out, with deep dark circles under his eyes and a face marked by exhaustion. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, surprised to see Celia and Manuela. "I just came for some coffee." Irene immediately served a cup of fresh coffee, while the three exchanged nervous glances. The ensuing silence was thick, heavy with unspoken words. It was Manuela who, to everyone's surprise, broke the silence. "Your son ate oatmeal yesterday, Mr. Edward," she said. Ignoring her mother's alarmed look, Edward turned to her, confused. "What did you say?" "That is Raphael. He ate oatmeal with banana yesterday, almost half a container." A flash of hope lit up the man's tired face. "Are you sure about that, little one? He hasn't accepted food for 15 days. "I'm sure, yes, sir. I gave it to him myself." Celia intervened, her heart racing. "Manuela, please." But Edward had already knelt down to be at the girl's level, his eyes fixed on hers, searching for truth or fantasy. "How did you get my son to eat?" "When doctors and nurses have failed." Manuela held his gaze without hesitation. "Because I gave him something that didn't have bad stuff in it, like your wife's bottles." The atmosphere in the kitchen froze. Celia felt her stomach sink, fearing her daughter's recklessness. Irene held her breath, anticipating the explosion of anger that was sure to come. But to everyone's surprise, Edward just frowned, processing the implicit accusation. "What do you mean by bad stuff?" It was Celia who answered, realizing there was no turning back. "Mr. Edward, we have reason to believe that someone is tampering with Raphael's food, putting something in it that makes him refuse to eat." "And why would someone do that?" Edward's voice was low, controlled, but there was an underlying tremor. To convince you that Raphael needs to be hospitalized, Manuela replied, with the direct logic of children. To make you believe he's very sick. Edward stood up, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of turmoil. This is a very serious accusation. Do you have any proof? Manuela opened her backpack and took out her notebook, along with the plastic bags containing the collected samples. I've been documenting everything, she explained, showing her meticulous notes. The times, Raphael's reactions, who prepares each meal, she pointed to the plastic bags, and I collected samples of what Mrs. Marcia puts in the bottles. It has a strange bitter smell, and it leaves dark stains on paper. Edward examined the material with growing attention, his initial skepticism giving way to concern. This doesn't prove anything, he said finally, though his tone betrayed doubt. It could be some medicinal supplement prescribed by the doctors. Then why doesn't it have a pharmacy label? Manuela retorted. And why is only your wife allowed to handle it? And more importantly, why does Raphael accept normal food but refuse everything that has this substance in it? The questions hung in the air like accusations. Edward took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts amidst the confusion of emotions. I will look into this, he finally promised. But I need more concrete evidence before I confront Marcia with these theories. We can get more proof, Celia offered, surprising herself with her boldness. But we need your cooperation, sir. Edward reflected for a moment, the conflict evident on his face. Finally, he came to a decision. This afternoon I have a meeting out of the house. Marcia will be here supervising the nurse. It would be an opportunity for you to investigate further if that's what you intend to do. The three women exchanged astonished glances. They hadn't expected Edward to cooperate so easily. But I want to make something very clear, he continued, his voice now firm. If you don't find anything concrete, I expect you to drop these suspicions, and if you're wrong, there will be consequences. With those words he left the kitchen, leaving behind a silence heavy with expectations and fears. What just happened? Celia asked, still stunned. He gave us a chance, Manuela replied, putting her evidence back in her backpack. Now we have to take it. The three spent the next hour devising a detailed plan. Irene would stay in the kitchen, monitoring Marcia whenever she came to prepare the bottles or formulas. Celia, under the pretext of cleaning the master bedroom, would try to locate and photograph the mysterious amber vial. And Manuela, despite her mother's protests, insisted on staying close to Raphael. He trusts me now, she argued. If I can get him to eat again, we'll have proof that the problem isn't psychological. Reluctantly, Celia agreed, on the condition that Manuela would be extremely cautious. Around 2 in the afternoon, as expected, Edward left for his meeting. Not long after, Marcia met with Nurse Luciana in the office, leaving the coast clear for the small investigation team. Celia headed to the master bedroom, carrying cleaning supplies as a disguise. With skill acquired over years of work, she methodically searched the closet, the dresser drawers and the master bathroom, always alert for any sound that might indicate Marcia's return. At the back of the lingerie drawer, hidden under layers of silk, she found something. A small wooden box locked with a decorative padlock. It was heavy for its size and made a glassy sound when gently shaken. Bingo, Celia murmured, photographing the box with the old cell phone she used mainly for communicating with Manuela. She tried to open it, but without success. Frustrated, she returned it to its hiding place exactly as she had found it. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Irene watched Marcia prepare the afternoon bottle. Under the pretext of preparing dinner, she stayed close enough to see, but not so close as to arouse suspicion. I need more powdered formula, Marcia commented, rummaging through the cupboards. Luciana, can you get some from the second-floor stock? When the nurse left, Marcia looked around to make sure she was alone. She didn't notice Irene partially hidden by the pantry door. With quick movements, she took a small vial from her pocket, different from the amber one. This one was transparent, and added a few drops to the already prepared milk. Irene, sensing an opportunity, purposely dropped a pan, creating a distraction. Startled, Marcia moved away from the counter, giving Irene time to while pretending to help clean up the mess, bump into the bottle, spilling some of its contents. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Marcia," she exclaimed, already holding a cloth to clean the spill. Discreetly, she wrung the wet cloth into a plastic bag, hidden in her apron pocket. Marcia, annoyed but not suspicious, just sighed. "Be more careful, Irene. I'll have to prepare another one." In Raphael's room, Manuela had managed to get in by taking advantage of the moment the nurse was called away by Marcia. She found the boy sitting up in his crib, more alert than in previous days. There was color in his cheeks, a promising sign. "Hi, Raphael," she whispered, approaching cautiously. "I brought you more bread." The boy watched her with attentive eyes, and for the first time, Manuela saw his lips curve into a small smile. "You remember me, don't you?" She continued, offering the bread. "I'm Manuela." To her surprise and delight, Raphael reached out his little hand to accept the food. He ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a precious gift. "That's right, eat it all up," Manuela encouraged. "We need to show your dad that you're not sick." The sound of footsteps in the hallway alerted Manuela, who quickly hid in the adjacent bathroom, leaving the door ajar to watch. It was Luciana bringing the new bottle prepared by Marcia. "Snack time, Raphael," the nurse announced, sitting on the edge of the crib. "Let's just try a little bit today, okay?" Manuela watched intently as the nurse offered the bottle. Raphael, who moments before had enthusiastically accepted the bread, now turned his head away, closing his mouth firmly. "Please, Raphael," Luciana insisted, frustration evident in her voice. "Just one sip." The boy remained adamant. After several attempts, the nurse gave up, placing the bottle on the nightstand with a sigh. "I'll go get your medicine," she said, leaving the room. As soon as the door closed, Manuela came out of hiding. She picked up the bottle and, using a tissue, collected a sample of the liquid. Then she poured the rest down the toilet and put the empty container back in the same place, as if Raphael had once again refused it. "Don't worry," she whispered to the boy, who was watching her with curiosity. "We'll soon prove that you're being mistreated, and everything will get better." At that moment, the bedroom door opened abruptly. Manuela froze, her heart pounding with fear. It wasn't the nurse returning. It was Marcia, and her gaze left no doubt. She had discovered the intrusion. "So this is where you are, you little spy," she said, her voice too sweet to match the coldness in her eyes. "I think we need to have a talk, don't we?" Chapter 5. The Little Detective's Dossier. Manuela felt her blood run cold as she faced Marcia. The woman advanced across the room with calculated steps, like a predator cornering its prey. Raphael, sensing the tension, shrank back in his crib, his eyes wide with fear. I just came to see if he was okay," Manuela stammered, instinctively hiding the hands that held the collected evidence behind her back. "How touching," Marcia replied, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. "A slum kid concerned about the well-being of an empire's heir. Almost like a fairy tale, isn't it?" Celia, who was passing by the hallway carrying cleaning supplies, heard Marcia's voice and immediately sensed the danger. She dropped everything and rushed into the room, finding her daughter cornered. "Mrs. Marcia, I'm so sorry," she intervened quickly. "Manuela shouldn't be in here. I'll take her away right now." "Too late," Marcia retorted without taking her eyes off Manuela. "Your daughter has been visiting Raphael in secret, feeding him unauthorized foods, interfering with his medical treatment. Do you know what that constitutes, Celia?" Before Celia could answer, Marcia snatched the empty bottle from the nightstand, waving it in the air like a piece of criminal evidence. "And now this. She's discarding his prescribed nutrition." Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "What are you trying to prove, girl? That you're more capable than specialized doctors? Or perhaps that I'm the evil stepmother from children's stories?" Manuela swallowed hard but held her ground. Years of social invisibility had taught her not to be easily intimidated. "I'm just helping Raphael eat real food without strange things in it." "Strange things?" Marcia forced a laugh. "What are you talking about?" "The bitter liquid you put in his bottles," Manuela replied, surprising everyone with her courage. "The one from the unlabeled vial." Marcia's face paled for an instant, but she quickly regained her composure. "Edward," she called out loudly. "Get in here right now!" To Marcia's astonishment, and the relief of Manuela and Celia, Edward did indeed appear at the door, still formally dressed but without his jacket. He hadn't gone to any meeting. He had been home the whole time, watching. "I'm here," he said calmly, studying the scene before him. Marcia, with a furious expression, Celia terrified, Manuela defiant, and, most surprisingly, Raphael sitting up in his crib, alert, with breadcrumbs around his lips. "Edward, thank goodness you're here." Marcia quickly adjusted her expression to one of maternal concern. "I found this girl in here, interfering with Raphael's treatment. She's discarding his prescribed food and giving him unauthorized things to eat." Edward didn't answer immediately. He walked to the crib and examined his son closely. "He looks better today," he commented, noticing the color in the boy's cheeks. "Because the medication is finally starting to work," Marcia argued quickly. "Or maybe," Edward interrupted, "because he's finally getting real food." The tension in the room was palpable. Marcia's gaze shifted between Edward and Manuela, trying to gauge how much her husband knew. "What are you talking about? This girl has been spreading absurd lies and you're listening to her?" Edward turned to Manuela. "Do you have the evidence you mentioned earlier?" The girl nodded, pulling the tissue with the bottle sample and her notebook from behind her back. "Here's everything I collected," she said, handing the materials to Edward. "And there's more. Irene also saw Mrs. Marcia putting the strange liquid in the bottles. And my mum found a suspicious box hidden in her things." Marcia let out a forced laugh. "This is ridiculous. Are you all conspiring against me now? Based on a child's fantasies?" "They're not fantasies," Manuela retorted. "I've been writing everything down. The meal times, who prepares them, how Raphael reacts. He always refuses food that comes from Mrs. Marcia, but he accepts it when it's me or Irene who offer it." Edward flipped through Manuela's notebook, impressed by the level of detail in her notes. There were drawings of the bottles, timestamps, observations about changes in the color and consistency of the purees, and even a methodical record of Raphael's reactions to each feeding attempt. "This is remarkable," he murmured, looking at Manuela with new respect. At that moment, Irene appeared at the door, accompanied by Nurse Luciana. Both wore grave expressions. "Mr. Edward," Irene began hesitantly, "there's something I need to show you." She held out the plastic bag containing the cloth soaked with the liquid spilled from the bottle. "I got this today, when Mrs. Marcia was preparing Raphael's bottle. She added something from a small vial when she thought no one was looking." Luciana stepped forward, visibly nervous. "Sir, I've also noticed strange things. The bottles change color and smell depending on who prepares them. And when Mrs. Marcia insists on administering them personally, Raphael always has adverse reactions afterward." Marcia looked from one person to another, her facade of control crumbling rapidly. "This is a conspiracy," she exclaimed, her voice rising dangerously. "You're all jealous employees who never accepted my position in this house." "Then you won't mind if we have the contents of these samples analyzed," Edward replied, his tone now harsh. "And that box Celia mentioned. Where is it?" "What box?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "In your lingerie drawer under the silk pieces," Celia intervened, avoiding Marcia's furious glare. The tension in the room reached its peak as Edward walked determinedly toward the master bedroom. Marcia followed him, protesting vehemently, while the others remained with Raphael. Manuela approached the crib, where the boy was watching everything with attentive eyes. "It's okay now," she whispered, stroking his fine hair. "Your dad is going to find out the truth." Minutes later, which felt like hours, Edward returned. In his hands was the wooden box, now open. Inside were vials of various sizes, some with handwritten labels, others completely unmarked. "I found this," he said, his voice trembling with restrained anger. "Along with this." He held out a small notebook, different from Manuela's. In it were meticulous notes on dosages, times, and expected effects. The handwriting was unmistakably Marcia's. "I've been on the phone with a chemist friend," Edward continued. "He suspects from the description that it's a compounded antiemetic substance, in a high enough concentration to cause nausea and food aversion, but not enough to be detected in common blood tests." Marcia, who was watching from the doorway, seemed to have aged years in minutes. "You don't understand," she said finally, her voice surprisingly calm. "I was protecting our family. That boy would always be a link to her, always remind me that I was the second choice. We needed a new beginning away from these memories. The hospitalization would have been only temporary, until we reorganized our lives." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Manuela, with her childish perspicacity, sensed the depth of the disturbance behind those words. Edward walked to the crib and, for the first time in weeks, took his son in his arms. Raphael, to everyone's surprise, snuggled up to his father as if he finally felt safe. "Luciana," Edward addressed the nurse, "call the police. And then Dr. Foster. I want Raphael examined immediately." As Luciana left to carry out the orders, Edward turned to Celia, Manuela, and Irene. "I owe you more than I can express," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Especially you, Manuela. Your courage and insight saved my son." The little detective smiled shyly, relieved that all her suspicions were finally confirmed and the danger was gone. The following hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. The police arrived. Marcia was taken in for questioning, and Dr. Foster, after examining Raphael and the substances found, confirmed the suspicions. The boy had been systematically exposed to a substance that caused food aversion. With immediate cessation of exposure, he should make a full recovery, the doctor assured them. "But I recommend a simple diet for the next few days, with familiar and comforting foods." It was already night when the mansion finally quieted down. Edward had insisted that Celia, Manuela, and Irene stay, refusing to be alone with his son on that first night of discovery. In the kitchen, which had been turned into an impromptu headquarters, the four adults talked in low voices, while Manuela played quietly with Raphael on a nearby rug. The boy, though still weak and silent, showed a liveliness that had not been seen for a long time. "How did I not see what was happening?" Edward lamented, running his hands over his tired face. "My own son being poisoned right under my nose." "Guilt can blind us, sir," Celia replied gently. "You were grieving the loss of your wife, vulnerable. Marcia took advantage of that. And what was her plan? To make Raphael sick until—" Edward couldn't complete the sentence. "From what we found in her notes," explained Inspector Reynolds, who had stayed behind to gather more statements, the goal was to create a hospital dependency. Frequent hospitalizations, inconclusive diagnoses, until you two took full control of the business, with Raphael permanently institutionalized as incapacitated. Edward closed his eyes, the magnitude of the betrayal still hard to process. "And if Manuela hadn't noticed," he murmured. All eyes turned to the small figure who, at that moment, was helping Raphael stack colored blocks. The scene was touchingly simple. Two children from completely different worlds, united by a bond forged in the most unlikely circumstances. "Manuela has always been an observer," Celia commented with pride. "Since she was little, she notices details that others ignore. But I never imagined that quality would be so crucial." Edward watched the children for a long moment, an idea forming in his mind. "Celia," he said finally, "I know it's early to discuss this, but I'd like to propose something. Raphael will need special care in the coming months, someone we can trust completely, and more importantly, someone with whom he has already established a positive bond. Are you suggesting I would like you and Manuela to move into the guest house at the back of the property? You would be promoted to head housekeeper with a salary appropriate for the position. And Manuela," he paused, looking at the girl with gratitude. "Manuela would be a regular presence in Raphael's life. Furthermore, I will arrange for her to have access to the best education money can buy." Celia was speechless, the implications of the offer reverberating in her mind. A chance to escape poverty, to secure a better future for her daughter. I need to think, sir. It's a very big change." "Of course," Edward nodded. "Take all the time you need. The offer will stand." That night, when they finally returned to their small apartment on the outskirts of the city, Celia and Manuela sat at the kitchen table, processing the day's extraordinary events. "Do you really want us to move there, Mum?" Manuela asked, toying with the worn cover of her notebook, now a crucial piece of evidence in a police case. Celia sighed, pondering the question. "It would be an incredible opportunity for us, Manu, especially for you. The school Mr. Edward mentioned. It's one of the best in the city, but wouldn't it be weird, living at the boss's house?" "It would be different for sure," Celia admitted. "But think about Raphael. He trusts you, he connected with you. Right now he needs familiar people around him." Manuela nodded thoughtfully. Despite her young age, she understood the weight of the responsibility being placed on her small shoulders. "I think we can try," she decided finally. For a while at least. To help Raphael, Celia smiled, hugging her daughter tightly. You're an extraordinary girl, you know. So young and already changing lives. At the Miller mansion, Edward watched over his sleeping son, observing every movement, every breath, as if fearing the boy might disappear at any moment. Raphael slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, the tranquility on his face a silent testament to the nightmare they had overcome. Next to the crib, on the nightstand, Manuela's notebook lay open to the last page, where the little detective had written in her childish but determined handwriting, "Case solved." The millionaire's son hadn't eaten for 15 days until a poor girl discovered it was the stepmother's fault. Edward ran his fingers over the words, a single tear running down his face. So simple, so direct, and yet a perfect summary of the extraordinary journey they had traveled. The next day, the routine of the mansion began to reorganize under new foundations. Irene, now officially promoted to head chef, prepared a simple but nutritious breakfast. Edward had cancelled all his external commitments to dedicate himself exclusively to his son. When Celia and Manuela arrived, bringing their few suitcases for the experimental move to the guest house, they found Raphael sitting in a high chair in the kitchen, trying to eat oatmeal with banana by himself, the same recipe that had marked the beginning of his recovery. "Manuela!" Edward exclaimed upon seeing them. "Look who's eating like a champion this morning." The girl approached with a smile, watching Raphael clumsily handle the spoon, more food ending up on his bib than in his mouth. "Good morning." "Raphael," she greeted, sitting next to him. "Can I have breakfast with you?" The boy didn't respond verbally, but his eyes lit up as he recognized her. He held out a spoonful of oatmeal in her direction, an offering that moved everyone present. "Thank you," Manuela said, accepting the gesture. "It's delicious." While Celia and Edward discussed the practical details of the new arrangement, Manuela dedicated herself entirely to Raphael, encouraging him with every spoonful, celebrating every small victory. Observing the scene, Edward felt a mixture of gratitude and determination. There was a lot of work ahead: legal proceedings against Marcia, therapy for Raphael, reorganization of the entire family structure. But at that moment, seeing his son eat with renewed enthusiasm, he knew the worst was over. "We're lucky to have found you," he commented to Celia, watching the two children interact. "Perhaps it's not luck, sir," she replied wisely. "Perhaps it's exactly as it was meant to be. Sometimes we need new innocent eyes to see what's right in front of us." Edward nodded, the words resonating deeply. Indeed, it had taken a child, small in stature, but immense in perception and courage, to unravel the web of manipulation and cruelty that had enveloped his family. And now, thanks to Manuela, a new path was opening up before them, a path of recovery, of healing, and perhaps eventually, of renewed joy. Chapter 6. The Rebirth of the Table. 3 months had passed since that fateful Sunday that forever changed life in the Miller mansion. Spring was arriving in Los Angeles, bringing with it renewal, a perfect metaphor for what was happening within those once cold walls, now gradually being transformed into a true home. The guest house, an elegant cottage at the back of the property, had been completely renovated to accommodate Celia and Manuela. Edward had made sure that they wanted for nothing, from new furniture to state-of-the-art technology. For Manuela, accustomed to the extreme simplicity of her previous life, it was like living in a fairy tale, a feeling she shared only with her mother, as she knew it was not appropriate to show her astonishment. That Saturday morning, as had become a tradition, Manuela woke up early to help prepare a special breakfast, no longer as the daughter of an employee, but as a special guest and, more importantly, as a central figure in Raphael's recovery. "Good morning, Irene," she greeted cheerfully as she entered the main kitchen, now a much more welcoming environment than in Marcia's time. "Good morning, little detective," the cook replied affectionately. The nickname had stuck after the case was solved, and Manuela wore it with pride. "Ready for our Saturday ritual?" "Always," she exclaimed, tying on an apron that Edward had specially made for her, with her name embroidered on it. The Saturday ritual, as they called it, consisted of preparing fresh bread for breakfast. The idea had emerged naturally after Edward noticed that Raphael responded particularly well to the aroma of freshly baked bread, an olfactory memory of his first contact with Manuela. "The yeast is already activated," Irene explained, pointing to a bowl where a bubbling mixture rested. "Today we're making that pumpkin bread that Raphael loved last week." Manuela nodded, rolling up her sleeves. In recent months, she had developed a genuine interest in cooking, especially baking. It was applied mathematics, her new private tutor said. Fractions, temperatures, fermentation times. How delicious science. As they worked together, the conversation flowed naturally. "How's the new school?" Irene asked, kneading the dough with experienced hands. "It's amazing," Manuela replied, her eyes shining. "We have a real science lab with microscopes and everything. And the library. It has more books than I could read in a lifetime." Edward had kept his promise, enrolling Manuela in one of the most prestigious schools in Los Angeles. At first, the transition had been challenging. The girl from the working-class neighborhood, among the children of the elite. But her natural intelligence and determination soon earned her the respect of teachers and, gradually, some classmates. "And Raphael, how is he adjusting to preschool?" Manuela's smile widened even more. "He loves it. He's already interacting with the other children, and even said 2 complete sentences yesterday. The psychologist said his progress is extraordinary." Raphael, now almost 4 years old, was showing impressive signs of recovery. The period of food refusal and subsequent malnutrition had left some marks, a slight delay in motor and verbal development. But the multidisciplinary team hired by Edward was optimistic about a full recovery. "And speaking of the prince," Irene commented, looking towards the kitchen door. Raphael entered, holding hands with Edward. The boy, once pale and apathetic, now had rosy cheeks and lively eyes. He was wearing dinosaur pajamas and matching slippers. "Good morning, professional bakers," Edward greeted, smiling. "Something tells me we're going to have a spectacular breakfast today." "Pumpkin bread," Raphael exclaimed, one of his few clearly articulated words. Manuela ran to hug him, a gesture that had become part of their routine. "That's right, Smarty Pants. And are you going to help shape them? Like last time?" The boy nodded enthusiastically, already pulling a stool up to the counter. Edward watched the scene with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. The transformation of his son and his home in recent months was nothing short of miraculous. "Is Celia not coming?" he asked Manuela, helping Raphael climb up. "Mom went downtown to buy supplies for her sewing classes," the girl replied, referring to her mother's new hobby. With more free time and financial security, Celia could finally dedicate herself to personal interests. While the children were busy with the bread dough, Edward and Irene talked in low voices about the preparations for Raphael's upcoming 4th birthday. It will be his first party since... Edward hesitated, still uncomfortable mentioning the dark period they had lived through. "Well, I want it to be perfect." "And it will be," Irene assured him. With Manuela coordinating the activities, how could it not be? Indeed, the little detective took her new role as Raphael's official best friend seriously. Over the months, she had dedicated herself to reintroducing the boy to the simple joys of childhood, drawing with crayons, building block castles, making up stories about imaginary adventures. More importantly, she had established a feeding routine with him based on trust and pleasure, turning every meal into a positive discovery. The bread dough, properly kneaded and shaped into fun little forms, Raphael had insisted on making dinosaurs, which looked more like misshapen amoebas, was set aside to rise. While they waited, they sat at the kitchen table for an intermediate snack. Apples cut into thin slices and a little cheese. "Manuela," Edward began, choosing his words carefully. "I received news about the legal proceedings yesterday." The girl stopped chewing, suddenly attentive. Although they tried to protect the children from the darker details of the case, Manuela was too perceptive to be completely shielded. "Marcia has agreed to all the proposed conditions," he continued. "There will be no public trial." "What does that mean?" Manuela asked, her legal vocabulary still limited despite her precocious intelligence. "It means she acknowledges what she did, accepts the legal consequences, but we won't have to go through the strain of a courtroom," Edward explained. "She will remain away for a long time, receive the necessary psychiatric treatment, and waives any claim to our family or assets." Manuela processed the information, her eyes alternating between Edward and Raphael. who seemed absorbed in arranging his apple slices into the shape of a star. "So he won't have to see her again?" she finally asked. "No," Edward confirmed. "Not unless when he's older he wants to himself." He paused, looking at his son with moist eyes. "You saved more than his life, Manuela. You saved our future." The girl felt her cheeks warm at the sincere praise. "Anyone would have noticed," she murmured, ever modest. "No," Edward shook his head. "Not just anyone. It was your watchful eyes, your courage, your persistence. You saw what all of us adults failed to see." At that moment, the timer went off, announcing it was time to put the bread in the oven. The serious conversation gave way to the children's excitement as they saw their creations risen, ready to be baked. "Look, Dad, my dinosaur got huge," Raphael exclaimed, pointing to a particularly misshapen form. "It's the biggest T-Rex I've ever seen," Edward agreed, winking discreetly at Manuela. Soon, the aroma of fresh bread filled the entire kitchen, and then the whole house. It was a smell that, for all of them, had become a symbol of healing and new beginnings. While Irene and the children set the table for breakfast, Edward briefly retreated to his office. There was an important decision he had made the night before, after long conversations with Celia and legal advisors, that he needed to formalize. In the top drawer of his desk, a document awaited only his final signature: adoption papers for Manuela. Not a traditional adoption, Celia would never give up her daughter, but a legal way to ensure that no matter what happened in the future, the girl would have the same rights and opportunities as Raphael. It was an unusual arrangement, certainly, but nothing about this newly formed family was conventional. And Edward had learned the hard way that social conventions meant very little when compared to genuine bonds of affection and loyalty. He signed the papers with a steady hand, feeling a certainty he hadn't experienced since before Caroline's loss. Then he took a small package from another drawer, wrapped in colorful paper with magnifying glass and footprint patterns, a gift he had specially ordered for Manuela. Back in the kitchen, he found a scene that warmed his heart. Raphael, sitting at the head of the table, presiding over breakfast like a little host, while Manuela helped Irene serve the still warm bread. That smell reminds me of the first time you brought bread for Raphael," Edward commented, joining them. "Who would have thought a simple piece of bread and butter would change so many lives?" "It's because real food isn't just nutrition," Manuela replied with a wisdom that often surprised the adults. "It's also memory, it's security." "Couldn't have said it better myself," Edward agreed, placing the wrapped package next to her plate. "This is for you. A small thank you for everything you've done for our family." Surprised, Manuela looked at the package with curiosity. "But it's not my birthday. Consider it a celebration of your 3 months as our resident detective," Edward joked. Careful not to tear the paper, a habit cultivated by someone who grew up saving every resource, Manuela opened the gift. Inside, she found a wooden box carved with her name. Upon opening it, her eyes widened. A professional investigation toolkit. There was a high-quality magnifying glass, small vials for collecting samples, a hardcover notebook much more sophisticated than her school one, and even a portable microscope. "Is this for me?" she asked, hardly believing it. "For the best detective I know," Edward confirmed, "so that you never lose your ability to observe what others don't see." Manuela hugged the gift against her chest, at a loss for words to express her gratitude. Raphael, sensing the importance of the moment, came closer and placed his small hand on hers. "Manuela is my hero," he declared with surprising clarity. It was enough to bring silent tears to the girl's face. They were not tears of sadness, but of a special kind of joy, the kind that comes from knowing that, despite her young age and humble origins, she had made a real difference in the world. The breakfast that followed was a quiet celebration. As they savored the pumpkin bread, they talked about future plans, the swimming lessons Raphael would start next week, the science project Manuela was working on, the possibility of a short trip to the beach for the next holiday. They were simple, everyday conversations, but laden with deep meaning for a family that had almost lost everything. After the meal, while Irene tidied up the kitchen, Edward took the children to the garden. The day was perfect. Mild sun, a light breeze, the kind of Saturday that called for outdoor activities. "How about we plant something today?" he suggested, watching Raphael run across the lawn with an energy that months ago had seemed impossible. "Can we plant pumpkins?" Manuela asked, inspired by the bread they had just devoured. "That way we'd have our own pumpkins to make more bread." "Excellent idea," Edward agreed. "Let's prepare a special bed near the guest house. You can take care of it together." While Edward fetched the gardening tools, Manuela watched Raphael play with a small remote-controlled car, a gift from Celia for her new job. The boy laughed every time the vehicle jumped over small obstacles, a crystalline sound that was still a novelty to everyone. "Are you happy here, Raphael?" Manuela asked, sitting next to him on the grass. The boy paused for a moment, considering the question with a surprising seriousness for his age. "Yes," he replied simply. "Now there's good food and good people." The sincerity of the answer struck Manuela like a bolt of clarity. That was it, good food and good people. The fundamental recipe for happiness, distilled by childish wisdom. Celia returned at that moment, carrying colorful bags with fabrics and notions. Seeing the trio in the garden, she left her shopping on the veranda and joined them, curious about the planned activity. "We're going to plant pumpkins," Manuela explained, showing off the seeds Edward had just brought. "To make more bread. How wonderful," Celia smiled, looking at her employer's son, now much more than that, with the same affection she dedicated to her own daughter. "I can already imagine the pumpkin pies we'll make in the fall." Together, the four prepared the soil, creating a small circular bed. Raphael, though still clumsy in his movements, insisted on participating in every step, filling his little bucket with dirt, helping to dig small holes for the seeds, and watering carefully under Manuela's supervision. It was a scene that any outside observer would classify as perfectly ordinary, a family working together on a gardening project on a sunny Saturday. But for those four individuals, it represented an extraordinary victory over evil, manipulation, and despair. At the end of the activity, Edward suggested an impromptu picnic on the lawn. Irene quickly prepared a basket with fruit, sandwiches, and of course the leftovers of the pumpkin bread from breakfast. Sitting on a checkered blanket, under the partial shade of a jaboticaba tree, they enjoyed the simple meal with a pleasure that transcended the taste of the food. "You know," Edward commented, watching Raphael bite into a sandwich with enthusiasm, "I've been thinking about transforming the formal dining room." "Transform it how?" Celia asked, curious. "It was never really used, not even before." "Well, before all this, Caroline and I preferred more intimate meals in the breakfast nook." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I was thinking of turning it into a more useful space. Maybe a playroom for the children or a library." "Library!" Manuela and Raphael exclaimed almost in unison, provoking laughter from the adults. "It seems we have a unanimous decision," Edward smiled. "A library it is." The conversation continued, flowing naturally between light topics and plans for the future. At one point, Manuela realized something extraordinary. For the first time since she had known this house, the environment was truly alive. It was no longer a luxurious mausoleum inhabited by ghosts of guilt and manipulation, but a vibrant home, where voices overlapped in genuine conversations, where laughter echoed without embarrassment, where the aroma of homemade food had replaced the sterile smell of disinfectant. The table, literally and figuratively, had been reborn. No longer a stage for tense rituals of forced feeding, but a space of communion, where nutrition and affection intertwined naturally. As dusk began to paint the sky in shades of orange, similar to the pumpkin they had celebrated that day, Edward looked at the two children playing near the newly planted bed. Raphael was explaining something to Manuela with wide gestures, his body language confident in a way that had seemed impossible just 3 months ago. "Thank you," Edward said softly to Celia, who was packing up the picnic leftovers. "For what exactly?" she asked, though her gaze suggested she already knew the answer. "For allowing your daughter to transform our lives, for accepting this unconventional arrangement, for bringing normalcy and human warmth back to this house." Celia smiled, her eyes also fixed on the children. "You know, Edward, when Manuela was born, I promised myself I would do anything to ensure she had opportunities I never had. I worked in houses like yours, cleaning, cooking, caring for other people's children, always dreaming of the day my daughter could have a different life." She paused, discreetly wiping away a tear. "I never imagined that dream would come true like this, so unexpectedly. That she would find her place in the world by doing exactly what she has always done naturally, observing, questioning, and caring deeply." Edward nodded, perfectly understanding what Celia was expressing. The children saved us, he concluded simply. Raphael and Manuela, each in their own way. As the sun set completely and the first stars began to dot the Los Angeles sky, the new family gathered to return to the house. Raphael, tired after a day full of activities, fell asleep in his father's arms before they even reached the door. Manuela, walking beside her mother, looked at the mansion that now, in some strange but perfect way, was also her home. The golden lights shining through the windows seemed more welcoming than intimidating. The front door, once a formidable barrier between different worlds, now opened to a shared space of security and possibility. "I think I'm going to like my new notebook," she commented, stroking the wooden box with her detective tools, which she hadn't let go of all day. "To write down new cases?" Celia asked with a smile. Manuela considered the question for a moment, her expression serious beyond her years. "Maybe," she replied finally. "But I think I'll also use it to write down recipes, like that pumpkin bread, so I never forget how food can save people." Chapter 7, The Shared Table. A year had passed since little Raphael had started eating again. The mansion high up in Beverly Hills, once a cold monument to power and wealth, had transformed into a true home where children's laughter echoed and the constant aroma of homemade food filled the air. On that Sunday morning, the kitchen was buzzing with activity. Raphael, now a full 4 years old and recovered from his trauma, wielded a wooden spoon almost larger than his arm, vigorously stirring a bowl of cake batter under Irene's watchful supervision. His dark hair fell over his concentrated eyes, and the tip of his tongue peeked out from the corner of his mouth, betraying the effort of his task. "Faster, Raphael," encouraged Manuela, now 11, observing the process as she arranged strawberries on a tray. "If you don't beat it right, the cake won't rise." "I'm beating as fast as I can," the boy protested, increasing his speed until small splatters of batter flew across the countertop. Irene laughed, intervening gently. "Easy, my dear. Her cake isn't just about speed, it's about love, too." From the kitchen doorway, Edward watched the scene with a full heart. His son, once on the brink of an abyss of malnutrition and apathy, now overflowed with life and health. His house, once a mausoleum of painful memories, had transformed into a space of healing and joy. "Looks like the pastry team is in full swing," he commented, entering the kitchen. "Dad!" Raphael exclaimed, dropping the spoon to run to Edward, leaving a trail of flowery footprints on the impeccable floor. "We're making a cake for Manu's birthday." Edward lifted his son into his arms, not caring about the flour that now stained his Italian sweater. "And from the looks of it, it's going to be the best birthday cake in the history of Los Angeles." Manuela smiled, a more restrained smile than Raphael's, but no less genuine. Despite a year of living in the mansion's guest house, attending an elite school, and having access to privileges that were once unimaginable, she maintained the modesty and simplicity that characterized her. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," she said, blushing slightly. "It's just another birthday. Just another birthday." Edward feigned indignation. "The 11th birthday of our resident detective, the savior of the Miller family. I'd say it's cause for a national celebration." The joke drew laughter from everyone, including Celia, who was entering at that moment, carrying a vase of fresh flowers for the table. "The room is almost ready," she reported. Raphael's cousins just arrived with Aunt Christina. Aunt Christina, Caroline's sister, and Raphael's biological aunt had become a constant presence in the blended family's life. Initially wary of the unusual arrangement between Edward and the two women of humble origins, she soon realized the positive transformation they had brought to her nephews' and brother-in-law's lives. "We'll finish up here and join you," Irene replied. "We just need to decorate the cake." The old formal dining room, as promised, had been transformed into a cozy library, with floor-to-ceiling shelves, comfortable armchairs, and a special children's area, with colorful cushions and lower shelves. For Manuela's birthday, however, it served as the meeting point for the small party. The celebration was modest by the standards of the Los Angeles elite, just close family and a few selected friends, but extravagant in Manuela's opinion, who until a year ago celebrated her birthdays with a simple chocolate cake at the diner near her public school. Among the guests were 3 of her new friends from the private school, selected not for status or wealth, but for being the first to see beyond the scholarship girl label and appreciate her intelligence and authenticity. Also in attendance were Inspector Reynolds, who had investigated the case and become an informal mentor to the aspiring detective, and her former teacher, Ms. Louise, who had always believed in the girl's exceptional potential. When the cake arrived, carried proudly by Raphael with Edward's help, everyone sang happy birthday with genuine enthusiasm. Manuela, used to going unnoticed for most of her life, was still surprised to be the center of attention. Make a wish. Raphael encouraged as the candles were lit. Manuela closed her eyes for a moment. What could she wish for, when she had already received so much more than she had ever imagined possible? A year ago, she lived in a tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city, sharing a room with her mother, worried about overdue bills and an uncertain future. Now she had security, a quality education, and was part of a family that valued her deeply. Blowing out the candles, she simply wished that this harmony could continue, not just for her, but for everyone in that room. The afternoon passed in a climate of quiet joy. The children played in the garden under the watchful eyes of the adults, who chatted on the newly renovated veranda. Edward had made a point of redesigning the outdoor spaces to be welcoming and functional, not just aesthetically impressive. "It's incredible to see how much this house has changed," commented Inspector Reynolds, observing the group with the analytical eyes of someone who had spent his life studying human behavior. "And I'm not just talking about the decor." Edward followed his gaze to where Raphael and Manuela were helping one of the shyer friends join in a game of hide-and-seek. "The change has been deeper than I could have imagined," he agreed. "Sometimes I think about what Caroline would say if she could see all of this." "She would be happy," Christina stated softly. "My sister only wanted the two of you to be happy. And look at him now, radiant, healthy, safe." The conversation drifted to lighter topics, but Edward remained thoughtful. The path to this moment of peace had been tortuous and painful. Marcia's betrayal, Raphael's suffering, the legal process that had dragged on for months, it all now seemed to belong to a distant past, almost like a story that had happened to other people. As evening fell and the last guests began to say their goodbyes, a gentle breeze carried the scent of the blooming jaboticaba trees. On the horizon, the lights of Los Angeles began to dot the urban landscape like an inverted starry sky. Manuela found Edward alone on the veranda, contemplating the view. "Thank you for the party," she said simply, joining him in the silent contemplation. "It was my pleasure," Edward replied. "You deserve this and so much more." They stood in silence for a few moments, a comfortable silence between two people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. "Did you know the pumpkins are huge?" Manuela commented finally. "I think in 2 weeks we'll be able to harvest some." Edward smiled, remembering the small garden bed they had planted together months ago. "We'll have to have a festival of pumpkin dishes. Raphael is already planning it. He wants to make soup, pie, cake." The girl laughed. "I think we'll be eating pumpkin until Christmas." Silence again. Longer this time. Edward, Manuela rarely called him by his first name, usually opting for uncle or sir despite his protests. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything," he replied, intrigued by her serious tone. "Do you regret it? Bringing us to live here, changing everything for our sake?" The question caught him off guard. For a moment, Edward wondered what had prompted this sudden insecurity in the girl who usually seemed so sure of her place in the world. "Regret it?" he repeated, choosing his words carefully. "Manuela, you and your mother saved not only Raphael's life, but mine as well. I was lost, drowning in guilt and grief, unable to see what was happening right under my nose." He paused, looking directly into her eyes. "The question isn't whether I regret bringing you into our lives, but how I can ever adequately repay what you did for us." Manuela's eyes shone with unshed tears. "Sometimes at school I hear comments about how we're different. Some mothers gossip that it's strange that there must be some other reason for you to have taken us in." Edward felt a wave of anger, followed by sadness. Despite all his money and influence, he couldn't completely protect Manuela from the cruelty and prejudice of the world. "People will always talk," he said finally, "especially when they don't understand something that doesn't fit into their narrow views of how families should be." He gently placed his hands on her shoulders. But what we've built here, you, me, Celia, Raphael, Irene, is real. It's a family. Different, yes. Unusual, certainly, but true in all the ways that matter. Manuela absorbed his words, processing them with the maturity beyond her years that had always characterized her. "Thank you," she said finally. "I just wanted to be sure. Never doubt your place here," Edward reinforced. "The shared adoption papers we signed are not just legal documents. They are a commitment that no matter what happens, you will always have a home with us." At that moment, Raphael came running towards them, followed by Celia carrying a small wrapped box. "Manu, we forgot to give you our special present," the boy exclaimed, practically jumping with excitement. "But you've already given me many presents," Manuela protested, gesturing to the pile of opened gifts in the living room. "This one is different," Celia explained, handing the box to her daughter. "It was Raphael's idea." Curious, Manuela carefully opened the package. Inside, she found a small, handcrafted book bound in soft leather, with her name engraved on the cover. Upon opening it, she discovered it was a recipe book, but not just any recipe book. "It's all the foods you made for me when I was sick," Raphael explained, pointing to the pages illustrated with colorful children's drawings. "So we never forget." The first page showed a simple drawing of a piece of bread and butter, that first food Manuela had offered Raphael in his most vulnerable moment. On the following pages were oatmeal with banana, pumpkin bread, vegetable soup, each recipe accompanied by a short note about when and how it had been introduced in Raphael's recovery. "We made it together," Celia explained. "Raphael dictated the stories, I wrote the recipes, and Edward helped with the binding." Manuela flipped through the book with reverent care, each page a celebration of the transformative power of food prepared with love. "It's perfect," she whispered, hugging the book to her chest. "The best present I've ever received." Raphael, pleased with her reaction, snuggled up beside her. "Now, when I get old, I'll remember how you saved me." The four remained on the veranda as the sky darkened completely, forming a picture that to any casual observer might look like a traditional family enjoying a quiet evening after a celebration. And in many ways that's exactly what it was, a family redefined by bonds of loyalty and love that transcended blood and social conventions. The next morning, life resumed its comfortable routine. Edward had an important meeting with investors. Celia coordinated the domestic staff in her role as housekeeper, and the children prepared for school. In the kitchen, Manuela helped Raphael pack his lunchbox, a task she had naturally taken on as part of her role as an older sister. "Cheese sandwich or ham sandwich today?" she asked, setting out the fresh bread Irene had baked the day before. "Both," Raphael negotiated, his healthy appetite a constant source of joy for everyone who remembered the dark days of his food refusal. "Greedy," Manuela teased, but she made both sandwiches, cutting them into fun shapes with special cutters, another ritual they had developed to always make food a pleasure, never an obligation. As they worked side by side, Manuela reflected on the extraordinary path her life had taken, from a small invisible observer to an essential member of an influential family, from an anonymous student in an overcrowded public school to a standout scholarship student at an elite institution, from the daughter of a cleaner struggling to survive to the co-guardian of an heir. But beyond the material and social changes, a deeper transformation had occurred within the Miller mansion, the rediscovery of the essential meaning of nutrition, not just feeding the body, but nourishing the soul through rituals of care, through the preparation and sharing of meals, through the table as a center for healing and connection. The old breakfast nook, where tense dramas of food refusal once unfolded, had become the beating heart of the house. The enormous solid wood table, which Edward had commissioned from a carpenter in North Carolina, comfortably accommodated not only the immediate family but also friends, staff, and visitors. The rigid hierarchy that once separated employers and employees had dissolved into an organic community, united by the common goal of creating a healthy and affectionate environment for the children. "It's ready, Rafa," Manuela announced, closing the colorful lunchbox. "And don't forget to eat everything, okay? No trading your food for the processed junk the other boys have." Raphael made a comical face, as if anyone has anything better than the food you and Irene make. Celia entered the kitchen, already dressed for the workday, though her uniform now consisted of elegant yet comfortable clothes appropriate for her management position. "The driver is waiting, children. Edward has already left and asked me to tell you he might be late for dinner tonight." "But he promised he would play video games with me," Raphael protested. "And he will," Celia assured him, "just a little later. He has a surprise for you and needs to pick it up himself." The children's eyes sparkled with curiosity, but they knew it was no use insisting. Celia was an expert at keeping secrets. The day passed normally. At school, Manuela once again excelled. In her science class, presenting a project on the growth cycle of food plants, inspired directly by her experience with the pumpkin patch. Raphael, in his kindergarten class, charmed his teacher with his confidence in telling his classmates how he helped his sister make a birthday cake. When they returned home in the late afternoon, they found Edward already waiting for them at the entrance, a surprise considering Celia's warning about his possible delay. "Dad, weren't you going to be late?" Raphael asked, jumping into his arms as soon as he got out of the car. "I managed to get everything done early," Edward explained with a mysterious smile. "And I needed to be here for tonight's special dinner." "Special dinner?" Manuela questioned, curious. "Is it a date I forgot?" "Not exactly a date, but definitely a milestone," he replied enigmatically. "Come on, everything is ready." The children followed Edward not to the breakfast nook, as they expected, but to the backyard garden where a surprise awaited. Their table had been set up outdoors, under the now fruit-laden jaboticaba trees. Delicate lights hung from the branches, creating a magical atmosphere as the sun began to set. At the table, Celia, Irene, and, to the children's surprise, Ms. Louise and Inspector Reynolds, who had attended the birthday party the day before, were already seated. "What's going on?" Manuela asked, confused by the elaborate setup. Edward guided the children to the table, where 2 seats of honor awaited them. "Today marks exactly 1 year since we solved the case of the millionaire's son who wouldn't eat," he explained, using the title Manuela had given it in her detective notebook. 1 year since our true family began to form. On the table, an extraordinary meal had been prepared, but it wasn't the kind of sophisticated banquet one would expect at a tycoon's mansion. It was a celebration of the simple foods that had marked Raphael's recovery journey: fresh bread, oatmeal with fruit, homemade vegetable soup, and, as the centerpiece, a huge pumpkin pie, made with the first pumpkins harvested from the patch they had planted together. "Wow!" Raphael exclaimed, his eyes shining as he recognized each item and its significance. "We wanted to celebrate not just Manuela's birthday," Celia explained, "but also the extraordinary journey we've lived this past year. And we invited people who were important at different moments in this story," Edward added, gesturing to Ms. Louise, who had always believed in Manuela's potential, and Inspector Reynolds, who had conducted the official investigation with sensitivity and justice. Manuela felt tears well up in her eyes, touched by the depth of the gesture. That table, set under the open sky, perfectly symbolized the transformation they had experienced, from the shadows of manipulation and distrust to the light of honesty and affection. "Before we begin," Edward said, raising a glass, "I'd like to propose a toast to Manuela, our little detective, who taught us to truly look at what is right in front of us, to Celia, who brought order and human warmth back to this house, to Irene, whose loyalty and culinary wisdom were fundamental, to Inspector Reynolds and Ms. Louise, who represent justice and education, 2 values that will guide our children's future." He paused, looking at his son with undisguised love. "And especially to Raphael, who showed extraordinary resilience and taught us that, even in the darkest circumstances, there is always a way back to the light." Everyone raised their glasses, the children with grape juice in an emotional toast. As the evening progressed and the meal was savored amidst conversation and laughter, Manuela observed the scene with a perception that went beyond her 11 years. What she was witnessing was not just a celebration, but the consolidation of something profoundly transformative. the redefinition of what constituted a family, healing through the fundamental act of sharing food, the discovery that security and love could flourish in the most unexpected places. Raphael, sitting beside her, nudged her gently. "What are you thinking about, Manu? You're so quiet." The girl smiled, putting her arm around the shoulders of the little boy who had become her brother in heart. "I'm thinking about how life is funny sometimes," she replied. "How a piece of bread can change everything." Raphael considered her answer with the peculiar seriousness that occasionally emerged in his more reflective moments. "It wasn't just the bread," he said finally. "It was you seeing what others didn't see. It was you being brave when the adults were scared." The profound simplicity of his observation left Manuela speechless. Indeed, her adventure had begun with an act of perception, noticing what others in their adult haste and worries had overlooked. And it had continued with an act of courage, confronting established authority in the name of truth. "I think we all learned from each other," she concluded, hugging the boy. When dessert was served, the magnificent pumpkin pie, decorated with cinnamon and sugar, Edward stood up again, this time with an envelope in his hand. "I have one more announcement to make," he said, his face lit not just by the garden lights, but by an inner conviction. "As you know, this year has been one of profound transformation for our family, and also for the Miller businesses." Everyone paid attention, curious about where the announcement was headed. "The experience we lived through made me rethink many things, including the purpose of the wealth I inherited and expanded," he continued. "And so I am proud to announce the launch of the Caroline Miller Foundation for Child Food Security." He opened the envelope, revealing the new foundation's logo, a stylized illustration of one child offering bread to another. With the slogan, "Nutrition is more than food," the foundation will work on two fronts, he explained. First, combating material hunger, ensuring that children in vulnerable situations have access to nutritious and regular meals. Second, and equally important, promoting awareness about emotional food security, the right of every child to an environment where eating is associated with affection and safety, never with manipulation or punishment. He looked directly at Manuela. "And if you accept, I would like you to be the Foundation's youth ambassador. Your story, our story, can inspire many people to look more closely at the children around them." Manuela was momentarily speechless, the weight of the responsibility and the honor mixing in her chest. I don't know if I'm the right person," she finally replied. "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just saw what was happening." "And that is exactly the point," Inspector Reynolds intervened. "Most people go through life without truly seeing. They look, but they don't perceive. You have a rare gift, Manuela, the gift of true observation, combined with the courage to act on what you see." "Accept, Manu," Raphael encouraged, vibrating with the idea. "That way you can help other kids like you helped me." Faced with the boy's enthusiasm, Manuela felt her hesitation melt away. If her experience could benefit other vulnerable children, who was she to refuse? "I accept," she said finally, a shy smile lighting up her face. "But on one condition." "Which is?" Edward asked, curious. "That part of the Foundation's work will be to educate adults to listen to children. If someone had listened to Raphael sooner, maybe he wouldn't have had to suffer so much." A respectful silence followed the girl's words. Again, her wisdom beyond her years surprised everyone. "That is an absolutely fair condition," Edward agreed. "And it will be incorporated into the Foundation's mission." As the night deepened and the stars multiplied in the Los Angeles sky, the celebration continued, no longer just for the resolution of a case or a girl's birthday, but for the birth of something greater. A family reconstituted by the bonds of true affection, a mission born from adversity transformed into purpose, a table, literal and metaphorical, where everyone had a place and no one had to fear what would come on their plate. Later, after the guests had left, and Raphael was sleeping soundly in his bed, now decorated with images of dinosaurs and planets, no longer the astronaut theme that recalled dark times, Manuela found herself alone in the garden, looking at the table where they had celebrated. The remnants of the party had been cleared away, but the memory of the occasion remained vivid. Celia joined her, wrapping an arm around her. "What are you thinking about, sweetie?" "About how everything has changed so completely," Manuela replied. And at the same time how some things stay the same. Like what? Like the fact that food is still the most basic way to show you care. How a shared table can be the most powerful place in the world. How watching closely and acting bravely can change destinies. Celia kissed the top of her daughter's head, her heart overflowing with pride. Do you know what your teacher, Miss Louise, told me today? That you have the potential to do anything you want in life. Medicine, law, engineering, all doors will be open to you. Manuela reflected on those possibilities for a moment. I think I want to be a forensic scientist, she said finally. Or an investigative nutritionist. Or maybe both. Investigative nutritionist, Celia repeated, smiling. Does that exist? If it doesn't, I'll invent it, Manuela replied with determination. Someone needs to be paying attention to what they put in people's food, right? Mother and daughter laughed together, the sound of their voices mingling with the night breeze and the rustling of the jaboticaba leaves. In the main house, Edward also contemplated the changes of the past year as he organized some documents in his office. On his desk, a photograph of Caroline now shared space with more recent images. Raphael and Manuela covered in flour in the kitchen, the extended family at a picnic in the park, the pumpkin patch with its first enormous fruits. The pain of loss had not completely disappeared. It never would, but it had found its proper place in his heart. No longer a black hole threatening to consume him, but a sacred space of memory that coexisted peacefully with renewed joy. The road ahead would undoubtedly be full of new challenges. Raising two children with strong personalities and such different backgrounds, navigating the social complexities of their unconventional family arrangement, balancing the demands of his business with his renewed commitment to present fatherhood. But now, unlike the lost man he had been a year ago, Edward would face these challenges with clarity and determination. And more importantly, he would not face them alone. He had by his side a team, no, a family, united by bonds forged in adversity and strengthened by restored trust. In Raphael's room, the curtains swayed gently with the night breeze. The boy slept serenely, his face reflecting his regained inner peace. On his nightstand, a photograph of Caroline watched over his sleep, no longer hidden as a painful memory, but honored as an essential part of his story. Next to the photograph, a small hardened piece of bread rested in a glass dome, an unusual souvenir, preserved as a relic of the moment his life began to change. Edward had questioned the strange choice of treasure, but Raphael had insisted, it's to remember that sometimes the simplest thing can be the most important. And so, as night embraced the mansion high up in Beverly Hills, the inhabitants of that improvised home rested in peace, secure in the knowledge that they had transformed a potentially tragic story into a journey of redemption and reconstruction. The meticulous dossier of a 10-year-old girl, the courage to question what seemed unquestionable, a father's willingness to admit his failure and start over, the loyalty of women who put a child's well-being above hierarchies and social conventions. And at the center of it all, the most basic and powerful of human acts, literally sharing bread. The final tally was, as Manuela had written in her notebook, both literal and symbolic. The millionaire's son hadn't eaten for 15 days until a poor girl discovered it was the stepmother's fault. But what had truly saved him was the combination of that crucial discovery and what came after, the patient and careful transformation of a house into a home, of strangers into family, of fear into trust, and of an empty table into a center of true nutrition where body and soul found sustenance.